Hey, I'm Kyle Gatlin. I am one of the pastors here. So glad that you've chosen to be with us today. Those of you watching online after whatever time you got in last night or at whatever time you went to bed. But you're up today watching, so we thank you very much. You know, most of us, hopefully most of you are part of our email system. But that, because we'll email you just news on the middle of the week, and then we'll email you a letter on Saturday that gives you a hint of what's coming up on Sunday, plus a couple other reminders or other thoughts that either I or Pastor Bobby will have. If you're not a part of that, we'd love for you to just sign in on the sheet of paper, say we want to be a part of your email list. But here's the deal. We try to communicate with email, so first of all, it won't blow up your mailbox with a bunch of stuff that you actually throw away. But it's also efficient. We get it out there to you. And what I've discovered in the emails, that most of us have them. We may not read everything. If you're like me, you're deleting anywhere between 50 and 75 a day that you don't read. Please don't delete ours. Usually it says covenant somewhere on it. Right? But every now and then I actually will get an email from you in our congregation, and I'll read it. Both of those have to take place, by the way. You have to send it and I have to read it. And what I've noticed is some people in their emails, there's something else in their emails, right? There's the signature, and then at the bottom of the emails is some other stuff. Now, those of you that come from the financial world always have this disclaimer that I'm not going to read. I'll be honest with you, right? It's like a huge paragraph of a disclaimer in the financial world. I don't know what it says. I don't read it. I know you have to have that when you're sending from your business email. It has something to do with financial stuff. I understand you have to do that. We have some people in our church, though, in their businesses, they put something else in their emails at the bottom of their emails. For instance, Mary Beth Meadows, Personnel Resources. At the end of her email, she puts a link to the podcast that her and Katie Saliba do called The Peopling with a Purpose or something. I think that's the name of it. And so that was just brilliant. You put something that promotes your business at the same time. A guy that I'm a part of Academy with, he does the same thing. Every email I get from him is going to have a link to something else that he's pushing, either a course or a podcast or an article or something like that. He does. I understand that. It's good business to do that. But there are people in our church that it doesn't have anything to do with business. That when they put something at the end of their email, it's more of like a way to communicate something differently, right? Like, for instance, at the end of Jake Wood. Jake Wood is owner of BioShield. And you see him up here leading worship on many Sundays. In his email, at the bottom of his email is this. Now, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it's the same God who empowers them all in everyone. So he chooses to put 1 Corinthians 12:6 at the end of his email. A guy in our church named is Jim Pangonis. He puts this at the bottom of his email. Thomas Jefferson said in 1774, God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? If you ever get a personal email from me, from my email account, you're going to read this. Howard Thurman's quote, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. The reason I started putting that there is because one of my friends, best man in each other's wedding, Carl Kreisman, he puts this at the end of his email, has done it for years and years, and it sort of gave me the idea a number of years ago. He puts this quote from G.K. Chesterton. The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. But my favorite is from a guy named Joel Boyd, part of this church. He owns a company called Coast to Coast, and they do a lot of refurbishing and painting, and he can explain all that they do. But the name of his company is called Coast to Coast. That's his website. At the bottom of his email is this: make God's glory resound, echo his praises from coast to coast. So that's probably my favorite, right, of all that's there. And what I like about being able to communicate by email is we're typing up something that makes it clear what we believe. So one of the reasons that the Jake and Jim and Joel and I and Carl put these at the end of our emails is we want to communicate something. And we want to communicate something very clear. And Jake actually told me, he said, you never know who will read that. And you'll never know what kind of impact that will have, just that thought when you read that scripture or read that quote. You'll never know what difference that will make, because you literally will never know. But we do know when we type something up like that, we make sure it's clear. I mean, there's no interpretation needed. You don't have to worry about voice inflection or anything like that. You're typing it out so you can make a clear thought that's printed, so there's no confusion at all. Because you see, I sort of like the printed word sometimes, so I can double and triple check to make sure I'm communicating what I want to communicate, making sure it's clear. Because if I'm speaking and I'm speaking off the cuff, you know what happens. You know what happens if you spout off something when somebody just asks you a question and you respond in a way and you come across and you may offend somebody by what you say. You may hurt someone's feelings. You may say something that you'll end up regretting. When you type it up, we sort of make sure that we communicate it clearly. You see, there's a reason why the police tell you you have a right to remain silent. There's a reason. You have a right to remain silent. You know where that comes from? It comes from an arrest from 1963, a guy by the name of Ernesto Miranda. Ernesto, in 1963, was arrested for kidnapping and rape. In the interrogation part, he admitted to the crime. And in that, after the fact, after he was convicted and all this other stuff, his lawyers said, wait a second, he was not told his Fifth and Sixth Amendment right. Fifth Amendment right to not self-incriminate, nor the Sixth Amendment, which allows him to have legal representation. Those are the amendments. He was not told that. So guess what? They took it to the Supreme Court. 1966, they ruled in favor of Ernesto Miranda and said, no, this conviction cannot stand because he was not read his rights. Hence we come up with the Miranda rights. And the rest of the story is this. 1967, they retried him on kidnapping and rape, didn't use the confession. He still got convicted, sentenced to 20, 30 years in prison. He only served 5 years, by the way, so he was out in 1972. And for 4 years in Phoenix, Arizona, he actually autographed the Miranda rights cards for police officers. He actually made money doing that. And the rest of the story, in 1976, Ernesto Miranda died in a bar fight via a stab wound. When they arrested the guy that was accused of killing him, they read him the Miranda rights. So you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to legal representation, all that stuff. One will be provided for you. So there is a right to remain silent, but there's also, we need to understand that the words that we use can have power. The words that Jesus used also have power. If you are reading through the Bible with us, we are finally in the New Testament. I know some of you are going, praise Jesus. So Jesus finally comes to covenant today. He hadn't been here all year. It's been the Old Testament all year. So Jesus is finally in the house. And first 18 chapters of Matthew was the reading this week. Matthew is one of the more interesting Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew has the most recorded words verbatim from Jesus. So everything that Jesus said in his lifetime, John actually tells us there's so much Jesus said and did, the world could not contain all that he had said and done. But Matthew does a pretty good job of giving us a lot of volume, a lot of words that Jesus had spoken. Again, not everything, but he gives us more than the other three. He gives us more than the other three. And the way that Matthew starts out of giving us words that Jesus says is actually the Sermon on the Mount. In these words, I want you to understand that we have words to live by and words to die by. Jesus, in everything that he says, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is everything that he says is words that we can live by, but also words to die by. Now, we're going to split those up, so we're going to take the words to live by first, because that Sermon on the Mount actually gives us an awesome picture of what this is. Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has a large group of people very early on in his ministry. In his early part of his ministry, these people are gathered on a hillside type thing. And again, what Matthew tells us in this Matthew 5, 6, 7 is a lot of words, but it's still a summary. It's still a summary because it doesn't take that many minutes to actually read those 3 chapters. And he was on the hillside for a long period of time. So they were actually, Matthew sort of gives us a Reader's Digest version of probably what went on when he was talking on that Sermon on the Mount that day. And what's interesting about this Sermon on the Mount is this was not a message about what thou shalt not do. This is not a message about don't do this and don't do that. This message, these words of Jesus, words to live by, were more about an attitude adjustment, about a different mindset that he was bringing than anything they had heard before. Because it's not simply about action, it's about intent. It's not about simply action, about what you do or don't do. It's about your intent. All right? So I'm going to read some of these. I'm just going to hit them. I may or may not give you the references, but they're all Matthew 5, 6, and 7. He starts out, many of us have heard the Beatitudes. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Like, blessed are the meek, for they inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of the righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So he starts out not with rules, right? He's not telling these people, here's the rules that you need to follow, but he's really giving them a spirit to aspire to, right? The spirit of blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are merciful. This is more of a spirit that he was trying to get across to them. Verse 17 of chapter 5, he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So he's not coming in here talking about, here's all these rules. He's not talking about the law, but he's refocusing the law. He's refocusing the law. It's not about do not, but it's about fulfilling the law. He's refocusing this. He also says, and we're going to have this theme that's going to come up in a few times today. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, you will certainly not enter the kingdom. So he's taking a swipe at the Pharisees and saying, hey, it's really not about how you do something in your life. It's more about your intent, right? It's about what goes on behind your decisions. And we get to that with the next one that he says, but I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And he says this after he has said, you've heard it said, you shall not murder. And he talks about being angry. It's not about the actual event of killing someone. He's going, no, I'm going to refocus that. I'm going to rephrase that and repurpose that law. It's not about the actual moment of taking someone's life. No, this goes back to the intent. This goes back to the heart. What was in the heart even before that? Does the same thing with adultery. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in her heart, with her in his heart. He's talking about what's going on in the mind. It's not about an action. It's about an intent. What's in the mind? What's in the heart? He goes on to say another one that you've heard it said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Are you serious? Well, he takes it further because he says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Wait a second. Turn the other cheek. Somebody slaps me, give them the other cheek. Now pray for them. What are you talking about? Why would I do this? Why would I want to live like this? Well, because he's refocusing the law. And it's not about what you do or don't do, but what's in your heart and mind. Then he again makes a dig at the Pharisees, I believe. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them, which is what the religious leaders did. Religious leaders were ones that tried to do as much as they could for show. And he says, no. If your intent is actually to help someone out, it doesn't matter if anybody sees you or not. It's what comes out of your heart. It's what comes out of your heart. And then he also says, another dig at the Pharisees, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. And this is in reference to the Pharisees who 9 times out of 10, when they prayed, they did it so everybody could see them and hear them. It's like when Jesus told that story about 2 people, a Pharisee and another person were praying. The Pharisee was saying, God, thank you that I'm me and I'm not like this other idiot over here. Basically, that's what his prayer was. And the idiot was going, God bless me, a sinner. And Jesus basically said, the guy who says, woe is me, I'm a sinner, that's who God's going to listen to, not the guy who's showing out for others to see. I think this is another dig in chapter 7. Do not judge, or you too will be judged, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. See, what were the Pharisees really good at? The Pharisees were good at pointing out everybody else's mistakes. There's 636 little pieces of the law that the Pharisees said you must obey. You must do this or not do this. 636. And I don't know about you. I can't remember 636 things every day. I mean, you think about 636 things that I got to remember to do or not to do every day. I'm probably going to miss a few. I have a hard enough time remembering to take 4 pills, all right? So, So this was a dig at the Pharisees, I think, but that's the point. That's the point, because the idea of the Pharisees was all about look at me. It was all about look at me, because some of them had these boxes on their heads that had the 10 Commandments in them. They had these tassels at the end of their robes so everybody would know how much they prayed. It was all about the look. It was all about the look. And Jesus is coming in with this Sermon on the Mount, these words to live by, and he's basically saying, listen, it's not about following the rules. It's about following the ruler. It's not about following the rules. It's about following the ruler, because we have one in Jesus. When he's giving us this way to live, when he's refocusing and repurposing the law, not to abolish it, but letting us in on the way to live our lives, goes way beyond the do's and don'ts. We follow him. And as we follow him, we understand from all of Jesus' life, particularly even just a little bit that we've read so far in Matthew, but if you take the totality of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we understand that we're following someone who unconditionally loves, who unconditionally offers mercy and forgiveness. So I'd much rather not follow rules, but follow someone like that. Someone like that. These words that Jesus had to live by, that challenged us to live by, changed the mindset, changed the attitude, helped us to look, hey, it's not about what we do or don't do, but what's in our hearts and what's in our minds, what's behind our actions. Literally a different way of living, but the same person that was speaking these words of life, the same person also spoke words that led to his death. That led to his death. I'm going to read off a bunch of these passages to you in just a second. And they are going to be in order of when they occurred in Jesus' life. Early ministry, late ministry, and late ministry. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, after all these words of giving life to people, they said, he teaches like no other. The crowds were amazed at his teaching. The crowds were amazed at his teaching. Matthew 7:28 said this. They were amazed at his teaching. The crowds were amazed at his teaching because they were the ones that were getting this new life. Conversely, the Pharisees were not. John 5. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, he was healing on the Sabbath, by the way. That's the whole point. He was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So very early in his ministries, according to the chronology of these passages, Jesus was doing something that he shouldn't have been doing according to the rules. Don't heal on the Sabbath. But then his words equated himself with God, which was blasphemy. And they were trying to kill him. So his words were stoking the fires that led to his death. While Jesus was having dinner, Matthew 9, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. I don't know about you, but if you were teaching something, you were the teacher, and the student told you, go and learn, you're probably going to take offense at that. But that's what Jesus told the Pharisees. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What's that in reference to? 636 rules. You got to sacrifice your life to follow these rules. And Jesus says, wait a second, you need to go learn something. Desire mercy. Desire mercy, because that's a changing of mindset, changing of the way you're thinking. And they didn't like that. They didn't want to change the way they were thinking because they were doing things like they were supposed to be done, in their opinion. Matthew 12 says this, going on from that place, he went into their synagogue. A man with a shriveled hand was there looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus. They asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And he said to them, stretch out your hand, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Again, another Sabbath healing. So this happened midway through his ministry. So they get him again. He hadn't changed anything. He's still healing on the Sabbath. But this time, his words and his actions continue to instigate his own demise. It doesn't get any better for the Pharisees because he said in Matthew 15, "You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen, understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them. Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" You think? He pointed the finger at them, basically said, you have all these rules about what you eat and how you eat, wash your hands before you eat, and all this other stuff, but that's not your issue. Your issue is the words that come out of your mouth. Because what you say is not matching up what your heart. Your words are not matching up the intent in your heart. You may say one thing, but your heart's not linking up with that. Your mind's not linking up with that because it's nowhere close to the kingdom that I am desiring for you. The last one, when Jesus went outside, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something he might say. Right before this, Jesus is basically saying, "Woe to you Pharisees," and outlined all the issues that he had with them. All their issues about they wanted to do the right thing in the right way, and if you didn't do that, you're going to hell in a handbasket, basically. And they were trying to catch him, right? And in the end, Jesus' words cost him his life. His words were words that he died by. So let me ask you this question. If you're hearing Jesus' words, and they are words to live by, are you also hearing the other words? The words to die by? Are you hearing those? Are you listening to those? Matthew 16 says this. Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever will lose their life for me will find it." It's Matthew 16, right? Whoever wants to be my disciple. That's who you and I are. That's who we are called to be. We are not called to simply follow Jesus. We are not simply called to listen to Jesus, to even believe in Jesus. No, the goal is to be a disciple. What did Jesus tell his followers in the end of Matthew? Go and make disciples. Don't go make churchgoers. Don't go make church hoppers. Don't go make church sitters. Go make disciples. A disciple is one who not only follows, but who heeds the words of the one they're following. That's a disciple. And when we heed the words of Jesus, these are words to live by, not words to exist by. The words that Jesus tells us is not words that he says, "Won't you do this and your life will be better and trust me." No, he lived it out. Everything he said, everything if you're reading in Matthew, everything that he says, he's living out. He's not going, "Do as I say, not as I do." He's not one of those guys. He's going to do as I say, because what I say I am doing. Those are words to live by, not to just exist by. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. This is the paradox of the Christian life. We do have words to live by, But guess what? We have words to die by. We have words to die by. Whoever will lose their life will save it. Whoever dies to their self is saved. That's the great paradox of this life. In losing your life, you find it. In losing your life, you are saved. God, I ask that in these moments that we have as we worship one more time, as we have one more psalm that we sing together, God, I ask that you'd remind us, of this mindset, this attitude change that you have given us through your Son, Jesus Christ, through his life, death, and resurrection. You have given this awesome life not to just exist, but to thrive. That we have words of Jesus to live by, but we also have words that we die by. We die to ourselves. We live for you. We gain our life when we die. So be in this time. Pour out your Spirit on us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Would you please stand as we worship?